before the show starts, I just wanted to cover for some reason, I don't know why, I don't all understand everything YouTube. I'm a retired pro angler, not a video guy, right? But anyways, some of my channels, if you search on it, if you search in fishing in the hoods, apparently it's not showing up. So you have to type in fishing in the hoods with the urban dragon, and then you'll find it, right? That's one of the problems. And the other one is it keeps putting it warning people, warning sensitive material, like as if it's adult. It's yeah, a general show, if as long as the kid as a certain age. I mean, I started understanding everything at 2 and fishing on by 3. I was fishing on my own all the time, right? Like, and that sort of thing like that. So, I mean, it all depends on the individual adult how they would understand, and of course, hooks can be dangerous and all that sort of thing. So, anyways, yeah, if you are having troubles with this is one of the reasons I've probably gotten some of these kinds of things right. Is because YouTube keeps listing it as like as if it's some adult content when it's not, and I didn't put that in there, so I don't understand what the problem is. But anyways, we'll try and fix it up here. So stay tuned. This show, I'm going to show you another tip for some big pike and that sort of things, hacks, and I'll show you an example and that sort of thing. But what I want to cover is something that very few people know about. Worldwide, there's still some lakes out there that have these kind of stories, and ancient Ireland ones of people's houses even being pulled down by a legendary fish. And this fish, where I'm going to show you some actual evidence that it actually probably really existed, and that the example in a church over in sort of Ireland of supposedly one that was massive length and about 400 pounds, and that may have had actually some reality. So a lot of people are confusing and think that they're talking about a regular northern pike. They weren't. The first lady to describe these that I can find was a lady named Julia Dame Bernards, and we'll cover her in a little bit and that sort of thing like that. And I'll show you some fascinating evidence of a real photograph from the turn of the 20th century, I guess 1905, that'll blow your mind. And there's actual real evidence of it in a museum and a little bit in a library mentioning other things about it, and original newspaper articles and that sort of thing like that. So we'll cover the most deadliest pike that probably ever swam the waters of the earth. And this sort of thing. And this guy was Titanic and that sort of thing like that, and was responsible for killing people in multi sort of areas across its range, which seemed to be larger at one time. So, anyways, but first we'll cover another sort of a pike hack here for bigger pike and anywhere from urban to remote waters. So here you can see on the one of my concoctions there with homemade spinner baits and that sort of thing like that. This is an actual very large spinner bait that I'm using. It's about 17 inches of wire. Some I make even over 30 inches and that sort of thing. And I started making giant ones in 74, right? And that sort of thing. But here's quite a big moose pike for my sort of area, right, in my hoods, right, and it makes it look smaller because the spinnerbait's so huge. But I'll show you that basically with creature concoction and homemade spinnerbaits or commercial models that you modify to make them bigger and that sort of thing like that, that it's definitely one of the deadliest pike baits that's ever been created. And that I went over 100 sort of tournaments and multi-species using these sort of things. Now, here's I've been making these giant spinnerbaits since 1974. I won well over 100 and some tournaments with them using giant blades because I ran out of blades in this lake that I was fishing with early bushwhackers and that. I robbed them from MEPS and everything else and still ran out. So I had these giant gang trolls, and I decided to put this, I believe it was blue and silver, blue and green. There was copper, blue and copper, different variations, right? And I used all the same day, right? So, but anyways, somewhere in that one of those ones, right? Now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was blue and copper, over. I flung it past this log, and it was starting to rotate because the blades was way too big for it, right? And that sort of thing like that. But it bounced up against this log, and I got a 5 pound, 15 ounce smallmouth with it, eh? And I said, bingo, this works. Then I started catching giant pike. I won so many giant pike tournaments doing this with homemade giant spinnerbaits, right? And that sort of thing like that. So the main thing is you need a good quality hooks or hardened and that sort of thing like that. You know, you can go smaller sort of stuff, but most of the time it's going to be like 3 odd to 5 odd sort of hooks like that, sort of way like that you should be using in that. And don't be scared of long trailers like that. You can melt, like I said, put a couple of pieces of an old plastic worm and a shad even together. As long as the heads areas that you're going to melt the two together are similar, then it should stay on there most of the time. They might start weakening after a while. You might need to reheat it. You can, of course, use crazy glue like way doing it and that sort of thing, right? So, but anyways, in this case here, I'm not using a stinger hook and that sort of thing like that, and just a big Indiana blade, I think that I had on it, and that sort of thing like that. But the different ones that I use, and they'll certainly catch monsters. And I wish I could go to Lake Windermere in England, because it's one of the few places besides Iceland that these stories still exist and that sort of thing like that. And the idea of a 10-foot pike completely turns my crank. So, anyways, we'll continue on. 1905, Lake Windermere, the largest lake in England, froze over, and it was the only time in history that it was recorded that it actually froze. So people started going out ice skating, and a gang ran across this dude frozen in the ice. This is the only really good evidence, besides some museum samples in a museum, of its hair. If you see up at the top there, you can actually see a little bit of string-like sort of area around its head there. Completely, to me, this is a giant esox of some sort here. You can clearly see the flaps on the side there, the gigantic teeth on it, and that. Look at the size of these things. I don't believe Julia Dane Bernards was a liar. I've seen evidence of this from Iceland, all over the world. When she traveled, she mentions a whole bunch of them in the earliest known book in angling called A Treatise of Angle, right, by Julia Dame Bernards. I haven't seen this book in a long time, but the thing is, I read it, a fascinating sort of thing, that a female is actually the at least earliest known example of like an angling like book, right, and that sort of thing like that. And she mentions about these killer drag pike and that sort of thing like that. There was a case where a whole this family saw these three kids out on a boat and that, and this drag pike knocked it. The kids fell over one after another, and this dude ate them, or possibly maybe a couple of them was around, right? But whatever the case, three of these children actually were eaten alive, right? And this sort of thing like this. What happened was is that these cheapskates, like usual, big business, the Bill Gates out there, right? These kind of guys, right? And not thinking with the head there too much. Instead of having a scientist come over and examine this mighty creature here and all that sort of thing like that, only a small samples were taken, and that was given out to a scientist and that. And they did identify it, that it was some kind of fish-like scales, right? So completely different than anything. But apparently these dudes could at least reach like about 10 feet long. There's a case that in the River Rhone in France of a group of people that were going over to celebrate about Napoleon or something, right? And this sort of thing like that. And they were going over these bridges, and one of the guys fell off, and they all witnessed this gigantic drag pike grab this dude, right? And then down there was a lady that had like mental issues, and she was going to commit suicide and that sort of thing like that. And she waded out into this. It's this bodies of water that are all interconnected and the sort of thing like that in England. And but this lady, I can't think of the name of it the second, but this lady went out and she was waiting, And so the guy was worried and concerned about her that was working there in this place. And he started wading out, following behind her. And this giant drake pike came and nailed her. And then this priest guy came to bless the waters, and some giant thing swirled at him and almost sort of ate him, right? But it went away for some reason. It didn't attack him, right? So it was lucky, or maybe the big guy gave him a zap there or whatever, right? But that kind of thing. So, anyways, there actually is in this museum in England and in a library some other information about it, showing the scales and everything like that. The last confirmed really like that you could accept that probably was one was the 1920s, but it could be that this guy was not used to this super cold water and that sort of thing like that. And this 1905, for some reason, maybe they dammed some of these areas because it was only really reported in three major areas in England, Lake Windermere and this group of lakes, and I can't think of the name of it this second, and a few of the river systems around there where there's reports of people being attacked and that. But also from Iceland, a similar like creature in Ireland, the Cro-Magnon and that they got like horns on their head and stuff like that, like a crown. And there's ancient stories of pike that was even in a church that was supposed to be over 400 pounds. And so modern critics would state that, of course, yeah, this must have been imagination or they glued a bunch of fish together and all this kind of stuff. But I don't think so. I think that actually this really was based on a separate species called a drake pike. I believe they actually existed. They may still possible out there. There's some very bizarre stories from Iceland and a few other places still that, of super titanic pike, like Bala, different ones like that, 10 feet long monsters, right? So, and even Lake Iliamana and things like that, right? So, but anyways, from the research that I did over the ages about this kind of guy, I just don't believe that some lady in the 14th century here is going to write all this about real deaths that occurred seemingly, right? And there's all kinds of mentions in even early newspapers, but this was published in 1905, I believe it was, that the Lake Windermere froze over. If you have trouble finding the year, you can find the original newspaper articles. This is not some CGI thing and that sort of thing like that. And so it's super fascinating. So sadly, I don't believe this drake pike exists in my region. Anyway, and that sort of thing. So I'm stuck with the regular esox lucius, right, or bizarre variants of it, like tiger muskies and what have you. I believe that this fish, if you look at it, there's a photograph that was a couple of days later. What they ended up, oh, this is what I meant to say. Sorry, the big business was worried that the stench of it was going to get away the tourists while this ice was still staying. So they had it removed and they put it in a line pit. What stupidity. What stupidity. This could have been solved ages ago, right? But sadly, I don't think that this creature, at least in most of its original range, exists anymore. Maybe possibly Iceland and a few others, right? And there's bizarre stories. There's even in Quebec, there's a couple lakes with these titanic 10-foot pike leg stories and things like that, right? And that sort of thing. Years ago, Dick Sternberg was out with some guy way out in the Northwest Territories someplace, and he claimed that he hooked this lake trout that was about 14 feet long and battled with it for hours. So they made these titanic homemade lures trying to get the monster. So it could be that all these ages that there was a separate species, right? And I mean, if you think of the size of how L's catfish get, carp can get way bigger than our North American market just because of the artificial feed, the growing conditions, and the food that's around, and all that sort of thing. There's some over 100 pounds, right? And that sort of thing like that, right? And my regions and that, a 30-pound one is a decent fish, right? So, like, it's sort of, it all depends on your regions, right? And that sort of thing like that, right? Like, so it takes them way longer to reach. But this last reported, there was some people that would claim that they had two legs in the back. In this photo, I can't see that, so I can't verify this part. But the adipose fin, the caudal fin, everything's the same. I can't see because of the pectoral fins are down, frozen, and the pelvic fins and that sort of thing like that. But you can clearly see it's an esox flap. Everything is 100% esox sort of a type, right? So whether this was some kind of musky like creature or whatever, right? But the thing is that Europe has ability to have these outside weird sort of fish, right? So I think that this guy actually existed, and may variants of it still actually exist out there. So, anyways, from the research, and you actually have real scales in a museum. It's awful shame. I don't know if fly meats away teeth and shit like that, but somebody, they should have not been so stupid. But the photograph that was taken when they were finally removing it a few days later from the stench and that sort of thing like that, its whole face flattened out, and you, even myself, would have thought that possibly it's a messed up sturgeon, but its tail was really screwed up, right? But the thing is, in the secondary photo, if you looking at it that way, you can't tell anymore that it was fully an esox. But thank God they had this original photo when they first stuck them out, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, anyways, super fascinating. Just another mystery out there that hopefully someday, hopefully these guys still exist. Because boy, I wish I had a time machine to go hunt this dude. Stay tuned. Hopefully enjoyed that sort of tips there, and shows you that there's some monsters still in our urban waters. Sadly, I don't think there's 10-foot monsters like possibly the only place in England that still has these kind of lake monster like sort of stories that could be based on a drag pike and that sort of thing like that. And there was an actual case of 3 children being eaten in there and that sort of thing like that. Like I said, so it is Lake Windermere, right? And there's some pretty intriguing photographs of what one of them looks to be like a giant L's like catfish. But I mean, there could be still a few drag pike in this lake that, of course, anybody normal person with a fishing line, they're going to have the big whopper story, but this thing would, annihilate that in a second, right? Because you don't have the proper equipment for it. So that's why I make big baits that you can reel in the monster. So, anyways, click like and follow, and stay tuned for more hot tips. So, folks, here this tip for this show. You can see here that quite often these heads will get weakened from the treble, whatever you're using, right? Different sort of hooks and that, and the jig heads and that. It'll tear open this, and then it'll be all become sort of garbage, right? So what you want to do, and I'll show you there a monster just using this sort of technique. I've used this in many, many tournaments for multi-species and that. Simply, we're going to just heat these together, and you try and make sure that they're both similar sort of thing. Now you got a bait that completely nobody is selling with these kinds of color combinations and the size of them and that sort of thing like that. Simply just need a lighter, and that's it. So you light that up, it'll melt, push that in there together like that. Now you got it fused, right? And that sort of thing like that. I'm not going to do it here because it's kind of hard to do from this sort of thing, but I'll give you the idea. And then away you go, right? And look at the decent sights of fish that you can catch with this. And I've been doing this since the 60s with early rubber worms like creme worms and different ones, and the man's jelly worms when they came along. Instead of leaving them on the bank or in the garbage and that sort of thing like that, keeping a bunch and melting them together to make new sorts of stuff or all kinds of different things. So stay tuned. Now you can see I fused them together there, and you have a completely different looking bait that the fish haven't seen, but still has many great triggering qualities and that sort of thing. So, anyways, that's your tip for this show, and have a nice day. So here's one of my creature coctions and work here. People have done this over the years, but I started doing it in the 60s, way before they ever had an article about such sort of things like that, with early creme plastic worms and early twister tails and different ones as they came along, all kinds of stuff, man's jelly worms and all these sorts of things, right? So there's quite a big moose for this canal. You'll see thousands of people that have fished there. They've never even seen ones half that size or even ever seen one, right? So they're difficult to target, they're difficult to hunt, and that's so you have to think outside the box here. But you can see here my creatures there. I've won tournaments with these and multi-species and that's quite a big pike you'll see here compared to lined up like right. So anyway, so we'll continue on with more tips, but you'll enjoy the show hopefully. Here's another big beast here that will so we'll let her go there. So we'll continue on. So here's another big one there, folks. Ooh, nice. So you can see these giant modified spinnerbaits that I've been making since '74. They're, like I said, works, right? And that sort of thing like that. So they catch monsters, giant muskies, all kinds of, species, walleyes, giant smallmouth, the largemouth, and that sort of thing like that. So it's just another technique out there. Like I said, there's no such thing as magic baits. But if you knew how hard it is to catch these guys in this place, and for me to be able to get limits and things like that out of it, I think outside the box. I'm using baits that others don't, and I know where to target these fish, right, and that sort of thing like that. So that's the big main thing. But anyways, we'll let her go. A few other pike was put on there. I didn't cover much this. I wanted to cover more about the drag pike. I'll do other pike shows. They're a bit difficult, and especially my canal. There's the population fluctuates year per year, right? But so there was a few that I caught that day that we didn't get on film. I can't find them. They're mixed in amongst us or anything because it was back up with a camera. Like I said, these Timu cameras last anywhere from an hour to about 3 hours max, and it's all random. They'll shut up on their own and a lot of different things, anyways. But again, this has been I Wear the Magic Ring, a King Solomon production. Keep our waters clean, or our mermaids, and the giant drag pike will be no more. And that sort of thing like that. But anyways, it just gave you an idea here, and it showed you that there's monsters out there and that sort of thing like that. And I'll cover his the bigger cousin there later as sort of relative, the giant esox masquinage again, hunting more monsters in the fall and that sort of thing like that, like these super titans here, right? Like, this is one of the largest photographs ever in history in the whole world. It's like a 63.5-inch giant. This is high, you can see my waist is way down here, and I'm not even remotely near halfway up near this belly of this thing, right? So it was a real titan, right? And this one's a super monster for the canal. In the late '70s, I got 161 inches out of the canal. That's the biggest one I ever seen, but they fluctuate, right? There was a 58-inch giant that used to hang out at this. That was like a dock that a lot of people had their line busted by. I landed at two different times, right? And that sort of thing like that. But it probably died of old age. I haven't seen it in ages. And there's been a few others that'll get in there and then they may leave and escape going down through the locking system either way, right? So anyways, stay tuned for some more shows and keep our waters clean.